October is the month of horror, time of year when the whole world comes together to celebrate and appreciate ghouls, ghosts, goblins, creatures, and freaks. Usually on Halloween night, me and my friends would be out in costume, bevved up to our gills and having a blast. But this year's a little bit different cause, well, you know. So instead I thought I'd take the opportunity to celebrate the holiday by discussing something which encapsulates perfectly the true spirit of the Halloween season. Something which expertly uses various locations and monsters to craft truly terrifying and intriguing tales, and has done so for decades now. Oh, wait, hang on. Halloween was ages ago. Oh well, I guess I'll just talk about Scooby Doo like I do every other month of the year. Scooby Dooby Doo is a franchise that I'm sure needs no introduction. Chances are, if you were at one point or another a child, you will have experienced some iteration of William Hanna and Joseph Barbera's team of teen, monster-busting super sleuths. As someone who regards himself as previously being under the age of 10, I can say I've had quite a bit of exposure to the meddling kids and their dumb dog. Being born in the year of our Lord 1998, I was able to experience various different eras of the series throughout my childhood. I got to watch Scooby Doo Where Are You?, the new Scooby Doo show, the 4 Mook animation movies, here's how I drank those by the way. I've got a massive soft spot for Alien Invaders, and Cyber Chase just doesn't hold up. And What's New Scooby Doo debuted when I was a kid, so I've had a ton of exposure to that as well. Scoob and the gang were actually a pretty huge part of my life when I was growing up, especially in my early childhood. I had all of the figures one could hope for, a couple of really neat little statues, VHS tapes of the different films and shows, and even vividly remember when I was in reception, making a conscious effort to walk like Shaggy whenever I could because I was so enamoured with the show. As I got older though, I actively took less and less time to watch the shows and movies as they were being released. The turning point for me being pretty much done with Mr. Inc. for a bit was Shaggy and Scooby Doo Get a Clue. I haven't seen it in years, but remember disliking it quite a bit because of how much of a departure it was from the rest of the series. It cuts 3/5 of the gang, has Shaggy and Scooby fighting a returning super genius villain every episode, and they have a robot butler, for some reason. It feels like a completely different show that they just tacked the Scooby-Doo name onto. It was also the last aspect of the series that co-creator, Joseph Barbera, had any part in prior to his death in 2006, and I find it really unfortunate that this was his final work. Basically, I couldn't tolerate any media that made the lovely Miss Dinkley look like this, so I chose to focus all my efforts into obsessing over Digimon and Sonic instead, and 14 years later, here I am. I'm alive, but am I living? As I'm sure you can tell though, that's not the full story of my experience with Scooby-Doo because, like most things in my life, gaming reared its ugly head and I was introduced to a whole new way to experience the gang. It all started when I was watching my Scooby-Doo and the Cyber Chase VHS as a young man. Preceding it were a bunch of different adverts and trailers. Trailers for Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone and Pokemon 3, the movie, The Lord of the Unknown Tower. At least that's what the trailer man called it.
Pokemon 3, the movie, The Lord of the Unknown Tower.
And just before a PSA about film ratings, there was an advert/tips and tricks video for the video game based on the film, which sounds like it's narrated by Billy West, but I'm not too sure on that.
THQ has a new game out called Scooby Doo and the Cyber Chase for the PlayStation game console.
Naturally, shortly after, I got my hands on the game for the PlayStation game console, which my dad owned at the time. This, alongside Crash 3, was my introduction to video gaming, but this isn't the game we're focusing on today. For Christmas of 2002, I received this wonderful blue box containing my beloved PS2, and with it I got another Scooby-Doo game, Night of 100 Frights. And man, for someone who bragged at the time that he could spell his own name because of the PH digraph at the end, this game was hard. I literally couldn't beat it because my brain couldn't compute the concept of backtracking as I was so used to linear platformers, so I didn't end up beating the game till I went back to it a decade later in like 2012. Night of 100 Frights though is also a story for another time. After not being able to beat Cyber Chase because of the final boss being stupidly hard, and Night of 100 Frights being far too complex for my 4-year-old brain to handle, I was eager to play a Scooby-Doo game I could see through to the end. Well, in the year that the Lord himself descended in gaming form to grace us with his presence, during a routine trip to a little utopia called Blockbuster, I discovered that there had been another Scoob game released, so naturally, I rented it for the traditional 7 days, and lo and behold, it was simple enough for my post-Digimon brain to comprehend. Because of this, when we returned the game through the nice little slot they had, I went inside and outright bought it, and I would actually go on to be able to finish this game. The game in question, Scooby Doo Mystery Mayhem, is what we'll be discussing today, as I believe it to be the best Scooby Doo game they've ever gone and done. Mystery Mayhem released for home consoles in 2004, following Game Boy exclusivity for the entirety of 2003. It was developed by Artificial Mind and Movement, now known as Behaviour, who you might know as being the studio behind Scalar, Wet, Naughty Bear, Dead by Daylight, Drake and Josh, or from when they first changed their name to Behaviour because of the connotations the acronym of their original name, A2M, had regarding lips and bums becoming chums. Comparatively speaking, the game was received the worst compared to the two games that came before it, with the PS2 version, which we'll be looking at today, averaging 57% compared to Cyberchase's 62% and Night of 100 Frights' 69%. It always baffled me how people thought that this was the worst of the Scoob games that were available at the time of this game's release, but when replaying it for this video, I did begin, I think, to gain an understanding of why some people would think this. I'm not saying I agree with them, but I can maybe understand how such an argument could be made. On that note, let's begin my favourite pastime of talking extensively about Scooby Doo while everyone else sits still and listens politely. The structure of a Scooby Doo story has been pretty much set in stone since the show's debut in 1969. The gang goes somewhere, there's some sort of spooky shenanigans ensuing, Velma, Fred and Daphne look for and find clues, while Shaggy and Scooby go to grab some grub, but end up unwittingly encountering the creature or monster that's plaguing the area. By evading the monster, the duo always end up uncovering an important clue, corroborating their evidence with the rest of the gang to hatch a plan to grab the ghoul, which fails but then works anyway. The creature is then revealed to be your Darn as Baldy Heed, who then proceeds to have a go at Scoob and friends before facing lifetime incarceration. One catchphrase later and we're out. Mystery Mayhem's story is spread over 5 episodes which follow a similar structure, each having their own mystery to solve, which contributes to the overarching narrative of the game. The gang are called to Hambridge Library by Velma's former librarian, Mr. Dinsdale, who enlists the gang's help to deal with some paranormal problems. Upon arrival at the library, Mystery Inc. discover that the hauntings at the library are due to real ghosts and not the usual man in a mask. The gang split up to look for clues, with Shaggy and Scooby finding, in the heart of the library, a book called the Tome of Doom, which has the capability to capture paranormal entities. Using the book to clear out the library and unmasking the only fake ghost in the place, this sets the gang off to visit a myriad of locations across the states, as they uncover a conspiracy involving using monsters to devalue land so it can be purchased for cheap by technology company Sherman Tech. After solving 3 further capers across the US, the gang find themselves at Sherman Tech's headquarters, trying to find evidence which will expose the company's shady dealings. While there, they discover the reason this land was purchased by the company was so it could build radio towers to help transmit a signal across the US for acute mind control, making the citizens of America more likely to buy Sherman Tech brand microwaves. We get a demonstration of this firsthand during the penultimate boss fight, where Velma, Daphne and Fred are hypnotized to use scream guns to remove Shaggy and Scooby from the premises. After this fails, the VP of Sherman Tech, Selena Drake, unveils her ultimate plan, betraying the company and intending to use the radio towers they built to control the whole world by amplifying their effects. She uses the final page of the Tome of Doom to unleash a giant fire ghost which can't be captured by the gang, because Selena herself holds the page that the book would need to do so. Luckily, the gorgeous, talented, intelligent, thoughtful, and considerate Velma manages to reprogram one of the towers to cause rainfall, turning the fire ghost back into a regular ghost, which Shaggy and Scooby are able to then capture. With Selena's plan foiled, she's arrested by the returning Mr. Dinsdale, or Secret Agent Dinsdale to give him his proper title. Dinsdale claims he knew of the gang's reputation, and knew they'd be able to follow the clues and expose Sherman Tech's plot. Shaggy and Scooby celebrate with some Scooby snacks and the credits roll. The story, I think, does a good job of utilising the expected Scooby formula for stories and applying it to the context of a game. It manages to use the formula well in a way that doesn't get stale, since it essentially has to be used 5 times in a row, and slowly sprinkles in details to keep the overall story ticking over, while keeping the stories of the levels themselves varied enough to hold my interest. The 4th and 5th episodes are the only ones that really deliver relevant story information within the episodes themselves though, with the first 3 levels being more concerned with their own mysteries, and only giving updates on the overarching plot after all is said and done. This isn't too big an issue though, and I wouldn't say it harms the game's storytelling on the whole, as the characters, the episodic stories, and the overarching story itself all feel authentic. It's just a set of solid Scooby-Doo stories, and really, that's all it had to be. I also feel that this game does the best job, compared to the other Scoob games of the time, of using the Scooby formula in an interactive video game context to create something original, as Cyberchase just uses the story of the movie, and Night of 100 Frights attempts to stretch one Scooby-Doo story over 6 hours of gameplay, which makes things feel really disjointed. Mystery Mayhem though, as I said, uses the expected Scooby-Doo formula well to create something wholly original that feels like a perfect fit for the franchise. Usually at this point I'd be moving on to talk about the gameplay of the game, and tell you outright what type of game it is we're looking at here, but Mystery Mayhem, in this respect, is actually sort of hard to define. It's not a 3D platformer like the other Scooby Doo games. It does have its decent share of puzzle solving, and you're on an adventure I suppose, but I wouldn't exactly call this a puzzle game, and saying something is an adventure game I've always thought was really ambiguous. What I do know for sure though is that it's a Scooby Doo game, so I guess that's what it is. But what does this actually mean for gameplay? You control the tag team of Shaggy and Scooby, exploring levels all the while avoiding or taking on monsters to find clues to help you solve the mystery of what's happened to the locations you visit. The levels are all varied in their setting and design, but feel like classic Scoob locations. A haunted library, abandoned movie set, deserted theme park, the swamp, and a technology company. Playing as Shaggy and Scooby here, given they're the ones that always end up encountering the monster first while looking for clues, makes a good amount of sense. Within these environments, you'll be on the lookout for a couple of collectibles, the first of which being, of course, clues. It baffles me that no other Scooby Doo game up to this point, even Night of 100 Frights, which is a platformer, had thought of using clues as collectibles. You'll find these usually along your way through the level, and collecting them all nets you some concept art and character models in the extras menu. The clues themselves are all relevant to the mystery of the level, and collecting them feels like an episode of the show, finding objects or information that ultimately all come together at the end of the level to help you solve the mystery. It'd be cool if clue finding was worked even further into the gameplay itself, maybe in a similar vein to L.A. Noire, but as they stand, they're a cool collectible. Hi, yeah, sorry, I'm interrupting my own video because I remembered one really cool detail about the clues while I was recording gameplay for the game. Essentially, when you find the clues within levels, you get told what they are, but that's actually it. But if you take the clues to Velma and then examine them again in the episode file, you actually have a full description where she explains to you exactly what the clue might mean. I think that's a really cool touch, the fact that you have to take the clues to Velma to fully understand them. Anyway, back to me. The second collectible you'll come across are ingredients to help the duo make some of their classic cuisine. Get massive sarnies. This is another perfect idea for a collectible, as Scoob and the Shagman are always looking for ways to chow down across every iteration of the series, and implementing this into the game as a way of unlocking bonus minigames is really neat. One thing I will say, however, is that some of the places they hide these ingredients are really mean. Like the lettuce in the first level. You have to defeat every enemy in the level to get it. Sounds pretty simple, right? Especially since you backtrack through the level to get to the boss fight. But there's 2 rooms you don't have to backtrack through, and unless you remember to go through them, you're locked out of the ingredient. The ham in the 3rd level is just as bad, if not a little worse, honestly. It's in this cabin on the way to the minecart section, but it'll only appear if you go back to the cabin after you've beaten that area. There's no indication that anything about the cabin has changed, but look, ham. These 2 instances aside, I really enjoy the idea of collecting the ingredients, as, like clues, it's another great touch which makes the game feel more authentic to the show. Another way the game does this is through its combat, and this ties into the 3rd and final type of collectible, pages for the Tome of Doom, the magical book that Shaggy and Scooby find in the 1st level. Unlike other Scoob games, you won't be charging into monsters head on, jumping on their heads or throwing pies at them. You'll be capturing them using the book. It's actually pretty similar to Luigi's Mansion, just with some added button mashing. I like this idea a lot, because it would be pretty out of character for Shaggy and Scooby, you know, the cowards of the group, to suddenly be brave enough to fight back by directly attacking people. They're pretty mellow fellows. The game takes their famous cowardice into account and has the duo use the book to defeat the creatures you'll come across. You'll encounter ghosts, shadows, poltergeists, mummies, dust devils, zombies, and finally fire ghosts. You won't be able to capture all these creeps right away though, and you'll need to collect the corresponding pages for the Tome of Doom to be able to capture them. These are the only mandatory collectible, and it's impossible to miss them as you'll be needing to defeat enemies to move forward. You capture the enemies by literally just opening the Tome of Doom next to them and angling it towards them. You then engage in a tug of war to capture them. As I said before, it's quite similar to Luigi's Mansion, and if you're gonna use something as a basis for a ghost capturing system, the first Luigi's Mansion is probably the best place to look. Basically, just spam whatever button the game tells you to, and make sure you don't run out of energy, which these little guys refill. Each of the enemy types have their own ways of defending themselves once you try to capture them though. For instance, poltergeists will try and pull themselves towards something they can either throw or push at you to break the connection, and mummies will try using shockwaves, but if that doesn't work, they'll try and retreat into their sarcophagus to break the hold the book has on them. Not only is it a nice touch that all the monsters have different ways of trying to defend themselves, but if these monsters do succeed in hitting you while your life bar goes down, it's not because the duo are getting hurt, but because they're getting scared, which is reflected nicely in their character portrait. Not only is this another brilliant way to tie into the source material, but if you take enough damage, you'll enter a panic state, referred to as losing your cool. While you're in this state, Shaggy and Scooby will be too scared to do anything but run away, and you'll need to avoid bumping into enemies or their attacks, otherwise you'll need to restart from your last save. This is not only a nice little visual reference to their iconic running pose, pose, but also is a great system that makes total sense for these characters. You get out of this state by either avoiding enemies till the two can compose themselves, or by eating Scooby snacks to restore health to calm them down. I'd also like to speak about the game's level design. Mostly it's rather linear, and just has you exploring a series of rooms to find your way to an objective, collecting clues, ingredients, and capturing or avoiding ghosts along the way. I do, however, want to give special mention to one level in particular, which I feel best embodies the feeling of the series. The third level, Weird Wild West, is my favourite level in the game and, in my opinion, the best it has to offer, managing to freshen up the level design and pay homage to the show incredibly well. Let me explain. You start the level with Shaggy and Scooby choosing to investigate the hotel of an abandoned Western-themed theme park because they hear there's a buffet inside. You get to capture a couple of poltergeists and then engage in an eating contest minigame, something you'd expect to see in the show. The two then get separated because Shaggy's stomach is evidently heavier than his eyes and he falls through the floor. Scooby then has a brief segment which pays homage to the door gag made famous by the series. After you reunite with Shaggy, the level, unlike the others, completely opens up. You're given a street's worth of buildings to explore with a couple of objectives, and you're allowed to investigate the buildings in any order you choose to solve puzzles, find clues, and rescue a captured Fred from jail. Once you've had the chance to explore the area, avoiding the dust devils you can't yet capture by using this disguise box, another classic Scoob trope which can be found in other levels too, you gain access to a minecart minigame which, while at times being annoyingly precise and relying totally on memorization, is a great way to pay tribute to similar hijinks you'd see in the show. It's after this section you end up finding some key clues and the combination for a safe which contains the Dust Devil page once opened. Similar again to the show where Shaggy and Scooby often find a key clue after encountering and evading the monster. After reuniting with my one true love, who tells us she's just about figured out the case, we have one final encounter with a giant Dust Devil and the level ends. This level is great. It feels like a completely interactive episode of the show. It shakes things up well with its design and has puzzles which you need to experience the level as a whole to solve. It's varied, interesting, and, above all, fun, and it just makes me wish more levels in the game were designed similarly to this one. I'm not trying to say the other levels are bad, in fact the latter half of the second level is also a more open experience, but I just love how hard this level tries to feel as authentic to the show as it can be, even more so than the rest of the game. It's just good, proper Scooby Doo. From start to finish. Generally speaking, I think the gameplay is fine enough. It's got some decent variety in the things it has you doing between the combat, exploration, puzzles and minigames, and the level design keeps things moving along nicely. As I said, I do wish the levels were a bit more open in their design though. I also think replaying this game made me sort of understand why people at the time thought this game was weaker compared to the other Scooby Doo games of the time. This game, despite its variety, is very simple. The challenges you're given when you look at them are all similar. Go to room. Defeat enemies. Next room. Solve puzzle while avoiding enemies you can't yet capture. Next room. Get page to beat enemies. Next room. Defeat enemies you can now capture because of the page you collected. Next room. Despite how repetitive I've just made the game sound, I think the variety that's on display within the levels keeps things from getting terribly stale, but I can safely say it never gets as challenging or varied in its level design as something like Night of 100 Frights. Despite this, I love how fitting the gameplay feels for the franchise in question, and think that the gameplay, alongside the levels, does a fantastic job of capturing the spirit of the series. So while it's not too complex or difficult, I can still say I enjoy the gameplay that's on offer here, and I really appreciate how authentic to the show it tries to be. The tunes in a Scooby Doo game should never be something that are analysed or looked into overly complexly, so I'm not going to go too in depth here. Most Scooby Doo games aim for a style of music that would be right at home in an episode of Scooby Doo Where Are You?, but interestingly, Mystery Mayhem doesn't do this, despite trying to emulate the show as closely as it can for the rest of the game. Instead, it creates tracks which fit the overall vibe of Scooby Doo. Subdued, slightly mysterious tracks that wouldn't be out of place in stealth sections of other games, but match what you're doing in this game really well. However, while I respect the idea of trying something new, the only themes I actually remember from this game are from the mini-games or when something exceptional like an event happens. For instance, I can tell you what the minecart track sounds like, and I can whistle the music for when you lose all your health in my sleep, but don't you dare ask me to hum the theme of level 4. I will say though, while the music on the whole isn't particularly memorable, I do enjoy two very specific things about the music from two of the levels. In the second episode, Mayhem at the Movies, you visit the sets of various films being made at the studio you're investigating, and wouldn't you know it, each one of them gets its own little variation of the level's theme, which is a nice little touch. On top of this, the third level, Weird Wild West, doesn't actually have a level theme at all. While you're exploring the main parts of the level, the only thing you can hear is the wind. This is a really nice touch, given that the enemies that inhabit this level are living tornadoes, so having the only thing you hear for most of the level being this oppressive, howling desert wind is a nice way to subtly reinforce their presence and the impact they've had on the environment around them. So I guess, while the soundtrack itself itself isn't particularly memorable, it does lend itself well to the atmosphere and tone of the levels, even if it isn't exactly in line with the musical style I'd associate with more traditional Scoob. So, with an authentic feeling story, gameplay that feels appropriate for the source material, and a fitting, if forgettable, soundtrack, is it right for me to think this is the best Scooby Doo game ever made? Other Scooby games, which are mostly platformers, do a better job at designing entertaining levels and gameplay to complement their own story and music, making them better video games that just happen to star Scooby Doo. Despite this, I would still say that Mystery Mayhem does the best job with its source material, creating, without something to go off beat for beat like Cyber Chase, entertaining gameplay, well-themed and designed levels, and an overall feeling that is not only incredibly accurate to, but pays great homage to, the series that it's based off of. So while it's understandable that it was rated lower compared to its contemporaries at the time of its release from a gameplay standpoint, Mystery Mayhem does too much correct on top of its varied and interesting gameplay for me to like any other Scoob game more than it. As well as this, there's also one other factor that puts this game over the top for me and cements it as not just my personal favourite Scooby Doo game, but the best Scooby Doo game ever made. Within the first 3 levels, at any point you choose, at any time you so desire, you can go and talk to Velma. She stands there, patiently, just waiting for you to talk to her, and when you do, it's never anything less than delightful. She praises you for finding clues.
Great! You found a clue!
You have a lovely conversation about the area you're investigating.
I'm sure there's a logical explanation for these hauntings.
We're getting married in the spring. In every other Scooby-Doo game that was available at the time, the biggest issue was that Velma wasn't nearly as readily accessible. I think it's clear that I want to give Velma A2M. I think it's clear that A2M really listened to the fans and gave us the Scooby-Doo experience that we'd wanted for so many years. So not only did they manage to create a surprisingly authentic, interactive Scooby-Doo experience, they went above and beyond to ensure that fans would truly be satisfied, and words cannot express effectively how much I appreciate that. Thank you, A2M. Thank you so much.